All right. Our next speaker is Ilya Sukhar. And so Ilya is a builder of and investor in startups, and he and I have crossed paths over the years a number of times. His latest startup, called Parse, was a cloud platform for mobile developers, and Parse was sold to Facebook in 2013. Now, on the investing side, Ilya is an active angel investor and a general partner at Matrix Partners. And we've asked him to come here today and talk to us about transitioning from operating to VC and some of his lessons learned in year one. Ilya.
Thank you, Scott. So I'm going to give a little bit of a rundown of how I got to venture. Hopefully it won't be too boring. There's been some great stories today. And then I'm going to boil down a couple of lessons I've learned, both for founders looking to raise venture capital or considering it, and folks looking to get into venture capital, to become investors. So I left the frozen tundra of Ithaca about 10 years ago. I stuck around longer than most of my friends. I did a one-year master's because I mostly didn't know what I wanted to do. Most of my friends were going on pretty defined paths. Maybe they were going to go work at Google, or they were going to law school, or they were going into finance. And I had tried out a bunch of those things. I was a computer science major, and I had interned at Google and interned at Amazon. I had tried the academic route. I did some research over the summer, which was awesome. But it just didn't feel right for me. And so I did what did feel right for me, and I had the fortune of having that in my mind because of where I grew up. I grew up, fortunately, in Silicon Valley. My parents immigrated there with me as a baby from the Soviet Union in the late 80s. And they had gone through the typical immigrant journey. They started out by cleaning homes, kind of near where I live now, to programming at startups during the dot-com boom while I was in high school, and all the way to actually starting their own small company that exists today. And so I saw that journey, and I was kind of tied to it, inspired by it, and just really attracted to it. So I was primed for it, and eventually I jumped in. I interviewed with a bunch of startups. One of them was called The Facebook at the time. This was 2007, I believe. And as you'll see, this is not their logo. I interviewed with the company, really liked what they were doing, loved the team. But at the time, I concluded it was much too large, and there was no more upside left for me. So I was clearly not ready to be a venture capitalist then. But I joined a company with a silly name called Uyala and sort of a dingy office. And it didn't have the high-flying, crazy trajectory of Facebook, which I sort of watched from down the road. But it had a great team, really dedicated folks, very passionate folks. And I learned just a ton there. And I got to see the flexibility that a startup offers. So I got to do everything from engineering, which is what I was hired for, to product management, helping with business development, helping with sales, doing a ton of recruiting. It was this great journey. But it wasn't this easy journey. The company went through some pivots. I saw some of my friends get laid off and kind of pack up their stuff and move on. We had to raise money during the '08 downturn, like in October of 2008. It was pretty bad. I remember I was talking to one of the founders. I was like, hey, how's the fundraise going? What's going on? He's like, I don't know, have you seen the news? I'm like, I guess so. He's like, well, it's not good. I'm like, huh, that's true. My Washington Mutual bank account is like no longer accessible. So I guess it's going to be hard to get money. So anyway, I moved on after a couple of years to get back to earlier stage stuff, but the company found its stride. Eventually it was acquired for $500 million, and everyone was happy with the outcome. But it was a really great learning experience of both the ups and the downs of a startup. I left Uyala thinking I'd start my own company, but I had no good idea, and none of my buddies wanted to join me. So it wasn't happening. I did the next best thing, which is I joined a very small startup with just 2 guys who had just gone through the Combinator program. They had gotten some initial seed funding from good investors, and they had an idea that I was really passionate about. It was sort of a CRM, kind of like Salesforce, for individuals. So for people like myself to keep in touch with my friends, or for recruiters to talk to candidates, or for salespeople to talk to clients, any individual who had their own small network that they wanted to nurture and grow and that kind of thing. And so it was 2 of them, I joined, another person joined. The 4 of us built this product out over the course of a year. It went pretty well. We got tens of thousands of people to use it. Some of them loved it, some of them kind of dropped off. we had a little bit of a hard time getting people to pay for it, because we'd sort of built something for everyone, but nothing particularly suited for a particular style of person. And so it was pretty good for just about everyone, but not amazing for recruiting or sales or any particular use case. Luckily, the folks at the real Salesforce took notice and decided to pick us up so that we could join there, integrate our stuff into their product, and kind of live the dream on their platform, which was pretty exciting for me. I thought, OK, finally, I'm going to go to the big established place. I'm going to stop doing these crazy startups that keep going under or like having problems. I'm going to have a stable job. I'm going to go to the gym. I'm going to lead a normal life. I'm going to eat healthy. It's all going to be good. I'm going to be a normal person. And that lasted about 3 or 4 months. I have much respect for Benioff and what they've done at Salesforce, amazing company, but it was not for me. So I left again. This time I had a bit of a cushion from the acquisition, and I started to really work on ideas, and I was like, I'm not going to do anything besides start my own company next. No way, no how, I'm going to start a new company. And so this was mid-2010, and mobile was all the rage. Still pretty new. The iOS App Store was only a year or two old. Companies like Instagram and Foursquare were just getting started. People knew there was something there. It was a great category of innovation to be had, but it didn't feel saturated. There was lots of room to innovate. And so I spent about 6 months in my apartment, holed up, eating terribly, not going to the gym, just working on apps. I built all kinds of apps, lots of things that actually ended up being their own independent startups or things that got rolled into the operating systems. Good ideas, but none that I fell in love with. My friends liked them. They were hard to judge. Your friends will always give you good advice, or good feedback, and some bad advice, actually. And so I didn't fall in love with any of the particular ideas there, but I did notice something that was missing. The tools and frameworks and platforms that were available for web developers had really not caught up to the new mobile environment. All of the new challenges around various kinds of devices, not having an internet connection all the time, having to deploy things through the app stores with these gatekeepers of Apple and Google. These were all new challenges, and so building these apps was like really, really painful. Most of my time was spent doing things that were kind of the same app to app, but I still had to do them. I had to reinvent the wheel every time I wanted to spin up a new idea and get it to my friends. So I started this company called Parse to do that, to make that easier. And things went a little bit better this time. I applied to Y Combinator, got in, met some co-founders, got the initial team going, we raised some seed funding, and kind of were off to the races. And so I won't go through the whole journey. It was a 5-year journey. It's a whole talk in and of itself, but I'll talk about kind of the somewhat conclusion of it. A few years into the journey, we had attracted tens of thousands of developers. Those were startups, game developers, big brands, like the NFL and Fox and Home Depot and Sesame Street, all kinds of brands that have stuck in my head. And they were using us to power their mobile experiences. And so Facebook took notice of this. They were going through their own mobile transition, figuring out what their developer business would look like at that time. And they came to us with a proposal, which was, we want to compete with Amazon. We want to take your brand, your focus on developers, and do what Amazon did. Amazon had famously taken their infrastructure, their data centers, their technology that they were selling Beanie Babies on or whatnot, and had monetized it. They were offering their service to developers, and now that's a $10 billion business these days. And Facebook had the same assets. It had great data centers, great databases, great internal technology. And so they said, let's take Parse. Let's keep the brand, keep the business. Why don't you run with us with our resources and our stuff? And we thought that was pretty cool. We liked our independent business. We were growing, but this was like skipping 5 steps, and this was like the thing we really wanted to do. So we went for it. And it was really fun for 2-3 years. It was great. I enjoyed working with Mark. We got to take the platform to millions of developers. We got to get apps that had hundreds of millions of devices attached to them. Just real scale, real great challenges. But ultimately, there's always something more exciting. And Mark bought WhatsApp. He bought Oculus. And so our lower margin business compared to the ad stuff started to look less attractive. And so over time, we open sourced it. We migrated our customers, and the thing kind of lives on. But it was a little bit of a missed opportunity to some extent. So I worked on some other things. I worked on Mnsure, worked with Mark on various things across the company, and that was great fun. But ultimately, the big company, again, was not for me. So I moved on to investing in small startups. I joined Y Combinator, which had launched our startup, had launched the startup prior, had launched the careers, and helped so many of my friends. And I wanted to give back to see what it was like to be an advisor, to help people on their own little journeys. And it turned out to be super rewarding and fruitful. I thought at first it was like, oh man, I don't know what, there's 100 companies in each of these batches that come in every 6 months, so 200 companies per year. And there's no way you can be an expert on all of them. But it turns out when a company is going from 0 to 1, just getting started, it's all the same challenges. You can generalize your advice, and it can still be very useful. And people sometimes just need A, honest feedback, B, encouragement, and just hearing it from someone who's done it before. And so I did that for a while, and I found it really enjoyable. Ultimately, I decided to join a more traditional venture firm called Matrix, because I wanted to sit on boards. I wanted to be there for the whole journey. And 200 companies is a lot to handle. And so that's where I am now. We're kind of an old firm. We go back to investing in Apple and FedEx. I think folks wish they'd held on to both stocks, considering how the iPhone's done in the last 10 years. And we invest across the board, everything from chips for AI to we invested in Oculus, which kind of was a weird coming together of various worlds, to all sorts of new hard tech stuff. So I want to switch gears a bit and talk now about the more interesting part of this talk, which is the lessons learned, maybe demystify venture for some of you, both from is it for your company and is it for you as a career. So first one, venture firms are actually pretty different. They're not different enough in terms of the people that are in there. Diversity is definitely a problem for the industry, and we're trying to change that, and everyone needs to change that a bit. But in other ways, they are very different. And this is something that I don't think I realized when I was fundraising for my company, or many of my friends who are founders, or most people in the industry, I think, don't realize how different these companies, these funds are. And they're different in various ways. They're different in their decision making. So they're different in, do they vote? Does it have to be unanimous? How many people do you really have to convince? It's not just this generic API where you show up for meetings, show up for more meetings, show up for more meetings, and then maybe, based on some random chance, you get some money or not. That's what it can look like from the outside, but these firms are pretty different in how they decide these things. They're also different in what they like to do, how they like to invest, the types of companies they like to invest in. Do they like the science project that's coming out of a lab? Do they like the metrics-oriented SaaS business? Do they want to be active on your board? Do they want to kind of sit back because they invest in a lot of companies? We had a fun story when we were fundraising for Parse. We were at a firm that shall remain nameless. And the meetings had gone pretty well, probably on our third meeting. And at the end of the meeting, the partner asks, hey, why do you want to work with us? You probably have a lot of options. We know you're talking to other firms. We've heard. Why us? And a couple of us were like, oh man, we don't have a good answer for that. My co-founder, Kevin, blurted one out. He said, you guys have big satchels of money, and we want to dip into that money and use that to grow our business. And I was in the meeting. I was like, it's not wrong. But I'm not sure that's what they want to hear, and I'm not sure it's helping us. And so now that I'm on the other side, I don't think it's a big deal if someone said that to me, but I do think it really matters to get to know the firm, to understand what they like to invest in, how they make decisions, how they do their business. They might look the same from the outside. It's like an API, but really it is not, and there's something to figure out there. And you can do that just by talking to people, just by asking people who've worked with them. Just email any founder who's taken money from them. They'll probably tell you. So now you're perhaps in the fortunate position of picking a venture fund. This is a great position to be in, but it's actually really hard to make a decision. What do you optimize for? Do you take the highest valuation? Do you take the biggest brand? Do you take the guy who's offering you the most money in aggregate? The advice I have is to pick the best relationship. The person you think will be the easiest to work with, the easiest to resolve conflicts with, the most high bandwidth communication that you have with a particular partner. You shouldn't go crazy and forget all the other things, but when possible, optimize for that. This is something that I've really learned being at Matrix. It's been around for 40 years. Some of my partners have been on boards for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And like even the best companies go through crazy, crazy downtimes, have really negative periods in their history where things need to get reconfigured, where big decisions are made, where things get on the line in some sense. And it's so much easier when there's trust, when people like working with each other, when it's not an adversarial thing. So my recommendation is to optimize for the relationship. The last thing I'll say is that venture is not really for everybody. Every week, I see companies and meet companies that are great businesses. It's like a small team, 6, 7, 10 people or something. They pull in $1 million or $2 million a year, and I'm like, oh my God, you have it made. That's awesome. And then they come to me and they're like, oh yeah, we want to raise so much more money. Like, we think that's the real goal. And I asked them, what is the capital going to do for you? Can you really hire enough people, change the way you market, change the way you sell to get to that crazy venture outcome that we're kind of structured to invest in? It's like, can you take the 2 and make it 100? It's okay if you can't. Like, $2 million a year will pay lots of great salaries, give you great flexibility. You can work with your team. You can answer to nobody. That is a very enviable position to be in. And so if you're in one of these companies and you're thinking about venture, I would spend some time thinking about, do you really want that? Why'd you start a business? What do you want to achieve with it? If it's mostly flexibility and the ability to kind of answer to yourself, you've already got it. You don't need someone telling you what to do on the board. The other thing I would say is your company's probably not for every VC, even if it's awesome, even if it fits the model. It's just a numbers thing, right? I invested in 2 Series A companies where I sat on the board. They're big checks this year, over the past year. And I looked at over 300 to get there. And there's no way I made a good decision on all 300. I probably missed some. I probably misevaluated them. I probably discounted the founders in some cases. Almost always, I want to give them the feedback. It's not you, it's me. Like, I think your business could be very good. I just don't know. And so if you go out and fundraise and you get a lot of rejections, that's just part of the process. Don't feel bad. That is just like the way it goes. For every great company, if you talk to the founders of the guys who are IPOing, the gals that are doing great, they will have 101 rejection stories. And so I would say, don't worry about it if you're not for every VC. So to the other side, if you want to get into venture, there's really not one defined path. If you look at the backgrounds of the various people who've been successful venture investing, some of them are former salespeople, some of them are former engineers, some of the best ones are former journalists. They're all over the place. Some have started companies, some have worked at companies as executives, some have like never ever had any other type of job. They don't know what it's like to work at a company, but they're still very good at it. And so I would say, if you want to get into venture, it's probably pretty hard to optimize for the path. You just have to convince someone to let you in. That can be hard as well, but it means that it's open to a lot of different types of people. But it's not easy, and there's not really an easy way to do it. When I was a founder, I was pitching these folks, and we were making these mistakes, and I was like, man, we're making all these mistakes, but these guys have so much, they haven't made. This is easy. They're just listening to me talk, and then they just make a decision. How easy could that be? Like, I want that. There's a little bit of truth to that, right? Most VCs don't, wake up in the middle of the night because they know they have to fire someone the next morning, or, they lost a contract or something. That happens, but not as often. Being a founder is very, very stressful, and I wouldn't say venture is anywhere near that. But venture has this like slow, long burning stress, which is, it's a very hard thing to pull off. Imagine the goal, which is every year there's a dozen, maybe 2 dozen companies that will achieve some amazing outcome many years later. And how many are started? Tens of thousands? I don't know, 100,000? You have to sift through this massive haystack to find that one needle. You have to find the founders at the right time. You have to find them in the right industry. You have to convince them to work with you. You have to structure the deal. You have to do all these things that, if you multiply out the probabilities, are just insanely unlikely. And so it's not an easy job. And it has this stress of you don't really know if you're good at it for many years, right? So the company can make great progress for year on year on year. But the final outcome takes 7, 9, 10 years. And it could blow up in year 6. The economy could melt down like it did with that first startup I talked about. The founders could sell out early like we did with Parse. They could mismanage something. Anything can happen. And you can help, you can guide, you're on the board. But ultimately, it's their decision. So I would say collecting a VC salary is pretty easy. Being a good VC and actually making the real money, the good returns, doing the right thing for your investors is actually super hard. So I would not take that lightly. The last thing I'll talk about is kind of the key skills. If you'd asked me before I did it, I would say, you've got to see the future. You've got to know that Oculus is going to be cool, and then Facebook will buy it. How would you even do that? That's crazy. So you've got to see the future, or you have to analyze businesses really well. You've got to be a master of the spreadsheet. Or you've just got to be a super convincing salesman, and you've got to tell the founder what they want to hear so they work with you. So there's elements of truth to all those things, but I actually think listening and context switching are the key skills. You have to figure out in a few meetings, do you want to stake your career on someone else's ride? Do you want to allocate a bunch of capital that you might lose to other folks? Do you want to work with them? Do you want to have their successes and their failures on your record? That's really hard to do in just a few meetings. So you have to be an amazing listener. You have to think at a different level on what people are saying, how they interact, how you think you'll interact with them. That's a very hard skill that I see a lot of people struggle with. Multitasking, context switching. You've got to do that back to back to back every meeting with people who are doing wildly different things. It's like interviewing, imagine you were interviewing at your company, but every person that came in the door was interviewing for a different job at a different company that you had nothing to do with in a different market that you knew nothing about, or maybe you knew very little about. And so context switching becomes very important. I am definitely still working on those things, and that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much.